Hi, I'm Barbara Bernstein from BetterTeachingNow.com, and in this video we're going to explain how to multiply and divide positive and negative numbers. So you know that when you take 3 times 4, it equals 12. And the reason it does is that 3 times 4 really means 3 added to itself 4 times. And of course, it could also be 4 added to itself 3 times, added to itself 3 times. Both of these equal 12. So you could think of it either way. They're both correct interpretations of the meaning of 3 times 4. Now let's suppose that instead of taking 3 times 4, we have negative 3 times 4. Well, how could we compute that? I'm claiming that it's equal to minus 12. Here's why. Anything times 4 is that thing added to itself 4 times. And according to our rules on how to add, this is minus 3 and minus 3 is minus 6. Minus 6 and minus 3 is minus 9. And minus 9 plus negative 3 is negative 12. So you can see that if you multiply a negative with a positive number, this is kind of a way of understanding that the answer is the product of the two numbers, their absolute value, which means the number with no sign attached, just the numbers themselves, and then you use the negative sign if it was negative on any one of the numbers. So let's take a look at a little trickier problem, which is multiplying two negative numbers, minus 2 times minus 5. Well, if you had a minus 2 times positive 5, that would be minus 2, and we'd be adding it to itself 5 times. Minus 2 plus minus 2 plus minus 2 plus minus 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, added to itself 5 times. So that adds up to a minus 10. Okay? So you can see that whenever you've got a positive and a negative number you're multiplying, to be consistent with our understanding of the meaning of multiplication, the product is the two numbers multiplied by each other but using the negative sign. Now, if they're both negative numbers, you couldn't possibly have minus 2 times positive 5 being the same as minus 2 times negative 5, could you? Because positive 5 and negative 5 are completely different numbers. One is above 0 by 5 and one is below 0 by 5. So I'm just going to tell you that two negative numbers multiplied together make, when you multiply them, they become a positive. You multiply the absolute values, and then the two negative become positive. Suppose we had negative 3 times 2 times negative 4 times negative 1/12. Let's see what that's equal to. Okay, these are all multiplication signs. And then this negative is a negative sign. Doesn't mean subtract. We're multiplying by negative 1/12. The first thing I want to do is multiply negative 3 times 2, and that's minus 6, negative 6. Now I'm multiplying that by negative 4 times negative 1/12. Okay? All I did so far was I multiplied the first two together. Now let's multiply the next two together. A negative times a negative is a positive. So this is going to be positive 24 times negative 1/12. Okay, I'm just going to put that in parentheses so it's a little clearer. Now 24 is the same thing as 24 over 1. So this is the same thing as 24 over 1 times negative 1 over 12. And so this is 24 divided by 12 is 2. If you divide it out, you'll see that. You could also think of it as 12 goes into 24 twice, 12 goes into 12 once. So this is the same thing as negative 2 over 1, which is just negative 2. Okay? Now I want to show you something. How many negative signs did we have? Our answer turned out to be a negative. We had 1, 2, 3 negative signs. When you multiply two negatives times each other, it's a positive. If you're multiplying a bunch of numbers and there's 3 negatives, it's a negative. When you're multiplying a bunch of numbers and there's 4 negatives, what would happen? What do you think? Let's just make this easy. Minus 1 times minus 2 times minus 3 times minus 1. 1, 2, 3, 4 different numbers. They're all negative. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive, so this is positive 2 times, and if I multiply these two numbers together, negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. So I've really got positive 2 times positive 3, which is just positive 6. So you see, if I had 4 negatives, they would multiply out to being a positive. So the way it works is, when you're multiplying numbers together, if the number of things you're multiplying is an even number of negatives, then the answer is positive. But if you're multiplying a bunch of numbers together and you've got an odd number of negative numbers, the answer is negative. Did I say that right? Let me say that again, make sure I said that right. If you've got an even number of negative numbers that you're multiplying together, the answer is positive. But an odd number of negative numbers multiplied together gives you a negative answer. And one way of thinking of that is that if you have a bunch of numbers, negative x times negative a times negative y times negative c times negative q, or whatever, if I group them, every grouping of 2, a negative times a negative is a positive. So I'm always going to wind up with positives if I can group it into an even number of sets of 2, or any number of sets of 2 without anything left over, it'll all be positives. But if I have an odd number of things I'm multiplying, I'm going to have one negative number left over, and that negative multiplied by the positive result of everything else will become a negative. So that's why this rule exists. Now, what about dividing with negative numbers? Well, dividing is really related to multiplication. So think of it this way. Suppose I have negative 4 divided by negative 6. Well, that's the same thing as 4 over 1 times 1 over 6. So anytime I've got a division problem or an operation of division, I can change it by making it fractions, even if it's whole number, and change it to multiplying. So in terms of the sign, whatever number this turns out to be, which will be 4/6, which is 2/3, I've got a negative times a negative. So whether you're multiplying or dividing, it's the same rule of thumb. Two negative numbers, if there's a division, one of them divided by the other, the answer is positive. If I have, let's say, minus 4 divided by, well, let me do this with letters. Negative a divided by negative b, and then take that whole thing and divide it by negative c. All right, that's negative a over 1 divided by negative b over 1. That's equal to negative a over 1 times negative 1 over b. Two negatives multiply to be a positive, so that's just a over b. So then that's what this part equals, right? So now I've got a divided by b, and I'm dividing it and it's positive because it was a negative times a negative. Let me put that there. It's positive a over b divided by negative c, which is negative c over 1. So this is going to be a over b times 1 over c. Because whenever I have fractions and I'm dividing, it's the same thing. It means the same as inverting the second number after the divide sign and changing the division to multiplication. So this is a over b times negative 1 over c. It's still a negative number. This is a positive times a negative is a negative a over b times c. A times 1 is just a. So this is a way of expressing the answer to this. Notice that in the original problem I had 1, 2, 3 negative signs. This is negative b. 3 negative signs. So my answer was a negative. If it had been 4 negative signs and it was just multiplying or dividing, the answer would be positive. So when we're multiplying or dividing numbers that are positive and negative, you can just count how many negative signs there are. If it's an even number, your answer is positive. If it's an odd number, your answer is negative. Okay, thank you.